Okay, welcome back, everybody. And the following session is going to be called Moving Forward with Articulation Committee Formats. Here at BCCAT, we often refer to the spring as articulation season, since this is the time of the year where most of the articulation committees have their meetings. And, oops, sorry, one second. Excuse me. And this has also made it, this is the second year in a row where articulation committees have met online. And this has made it easy for BCCAT staff to attend and provide updates, as well as for representatives of various committees to connect, meet, and in some cases, meet more than once or twice a year. Last summer, we ran a survey to gauge the overall experience and perspectives of articulation committees in the online format. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Fiona McQuarrie, BCCAT's Special Projects Officer. Fiona has been with BCCAT for many years and has authored several research reports related to transfer and articulation. And many of you out in the articulation community will recognize her as she has attended many of your meetings. She's going to tell you a little bit more about the results of our survey, and then we're going to have a discussion about the format of meetings moving forward. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on moving forward with Articulation Committee meeting formats. I'm Fiona McQuarrie, and I'm the Special Projects Officer at the BC Council on Admissions and Transfer. The purpose of this session is to talk about Articulation Committee's experiences with different meeting formats over the past year and a half. The pandemic hit in March of 2020, and post-secondary campuses closed down right across the province. As most articulation committees meet between March and June every year, all of the articulation committee meetings had to go online, some of them on very short notice. This past spring, there was still some uncertainty about conditions on campus and transmission of the COVID-19 virus, so most committees chose to have their meetings online again. Online or partly online meetings are something that the articulation committees have considered in the past, but this past year and a half was the first time that online meetings were held widely across the BC transfer system's articulation committees. BCCAT was interested in how the online experience went. So in July, we conducted a survey of articulation committee chairs and system liaison persons, or SLPs. I'll be presenting the results of that survey, and then we'll open up the floor for a discussion of future articulation committee meeting formats. But first, I want to reinforce that BCCAT does not determine the format for articulation committee meetings. The choice of format is up to the committee. BCCAT may make recommendations about meeting formats, and for this coming year's meeting, BCCAT is asking the committees and the people planning the meetings to follow whatever provincial health orders are in effect at the time of the meeting, and also to try to accommodate the needs or requirements of the institutional representatives who will be attending the meeting. So let's take a look at the results of the BCCAT survey. The survey was conducted online, and a questionnaire was sent to the chair and the system liaison person of every one of BCCAT's 65 articulation committees. The questions on the survey asked about the meeting formats that the committee had used over the past 2 years and what the respondents saw as advantages and disadvantages of online and in-person meetings. We also asked in the survey about the committee's plans for its next meeting. The survey didn't ask which committee the respondent came from, but since the number of responses, 64, was about the same as the number of committees, we're pretty sure that most of the articulation committees are represented in the responses. The first question we asked was how long the respondent had been involved with their articulation committee. We asked this question to get a sense of how much experience the respondents had with articulation committees and with articulation committee annual meetings. More than 2/3 of our respondents had been on their committee for 4 years or longer, and more than half of them have been the chair of their committee for more than a year. Although we did also have a significant number of chairs that were in their first year as chair. So on the whole, our respondents are a fairly experienced group that is used to articulation committee functions and to planning articulation committee meetings. Then the survey collected information about how the committees had met since the pandemic started. Almost all of the committees had had 1 or 2 online meetings and held those meetings at scheduled times. A few committees experimented with asynchronous meetings, which were mostly in the format of having discussion through online postings on Moodle or some other platform. A couple of committees also had additional online sessions, as well as their annual meeting. The purpose of these additional meetings was to discuss amongst themselves what was happening in their courses and in their programs and at their institutions since conditions changed and as responses to the pandemic evolved. We also asked how many representatives typically attend the Articulation Committee's meeting. And we asked if the representatives or if the respondents noticed a difference in the number of attendees when the meetings were in person and the meeting were online. Most committees have between 10 and 30 attendees in the average year. And 2/3 of the respondents said that they noticed that the numbers of representatives attending the meetings was approximately the same when the meeting was in person and when it was online. We then asked our respondents about what they saw as the advantages of holding articulation committee meetings online. This was an open-ended question, as were the other questions about advantages and disadvantages. So what we did was to collect all the answers and read through them and then count the number of times that different themes emerged. As you can see, the most commonly mentioned advantages of online meetings were reduced costs, both in terms of the hosting institution and also in the cost for the representatives to get to and from the meeting, and also less travel time. It was also mentioned quite frequently that the meeting, if it was online, was more accessible in the sense that it was easier for people to join in without having to be there physically in person. We then asked about the disadvantages of having the Articulation Committee meeting online. And the most frequently mentioned issue in this regard was the lack of networking and building connections. Many respondents mentioned that they really missed the informal conversations that take place at in-person meetings, in between sessions, during meals, and during other activities. It was also difficult, in the respondents' opinion, to have online equivalents to in-person activities like field trips, campus tours, and professional development activities. Technology problems were less of a disadvantage than we mentioned, but we expected, but I believe this is probably due to people becoming more familiar with online meeting technologies as the pandemic progressed. Then we asked our respondents about what they saw as the advantages of in-person meetings. And not surprisingly, given what was cited as a disadvantage of online meetings, the major advantage that was noticed was more networking, more informal discussions, and better opportunities to build relationships. Several respondents also thought that there was better discussion and participation in in-person meetings. One factor that was mentioned here quite frequently was that it is easier in an in-person meeting to have small breakout discussion groups than it is to do that online. There was also mention that professional development and field trips and other events, including seeing other campuses and facilities for other programs, were a very valuable part of the in-person meeting experience. The disadvantages of in-person meetings were primarily travel time and cost. Every year, articulation committees, when meetings are in person, choose a location and try to schedule the meeting and the meeting time that is convenient for as many representatives as possible. But there is no way to schedule a meeting that's convenient for everyone. So any time or location may not be feasible for all representatives to be able to attend. There was also some concerns about the work involved for the host institution in putting on the in-person meeting. We then asked if there were noticeable differences in the level of engagement among the representatives attending the online meetings. We know from teaching online that, especially for long sessions, that it can be difficult to keep students engaged and participating for the entire time. So we were curious as to whether representatives attending online meetings engaged in the meeting activities as much as they would as if they were meeting in person. But the respondents said that they noticed less or the same amount of engagement. Only one respondent said that they thought there was more engagement online. So the level of engagement might also be a concern about the online meeting format. Then we asked whether the respondents' own committee had decided what format they would use for next year's annual meeting. And given that we asked this in July, and the meetings usually don't start until around March, the majority of respondents at the time that we asked had not chosen a meeting format yet. Among those that had decided, the majority were going to try to have an in-person meeting. And a couple of committees had said that they were going to experiment with a combination of in-person and online meetings. And when this was described, it was usually described as having an in-person meeting with an option for representatives to either phone in or use Zoom or some other technology to participate remotely. The final question we asked was if the respondents had to choose a meeting format that they personally preferred, what would they choose? And the majority said that they would prefer to meet in person. But a significant number also said that they thought a combination of in-person and online meetings would be their preference. Only 2 respondents preferred an online format. And there were also some suggestions about ways to combine in-person and online meetings, such as having a meeting in person one year and then online the next, or having 2 meetings per year and do one online and do one in person. So those are the results of our survey. I hope you find them useful in thinking about what articulation committee meetings might look like in the future. I want to emphasize again that BCCAT does not set the meeting format. It's up to each committee to choose the format that they feel works best for them and for the representatives attending the meeting. So now we're going to open up the floor for some discussion. What have your experiences been with meeting online as opposed to meeting in person? What format would you prefer in future meetings? And is there anything that the survey didn't address about meeting formats that you would like to bring up? The floor is open.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Fiona McCrory, who is here live and in the flesh, who is here to answer your questions. So even before this session started, Amber Johnson from University of Fraser Valley had put in a question. So I really appreciate the promptness of putting a question into the Q&A. So I'm going to start off with Amber's question. She has a 2-part question. So I'll start with the first part. Will institutions be having face-to-face meetings in the next year? And will there be an option for hosting both formats, face-to-face and virtual, for those who cannot attend in person?
I think part of that was addressed in the survey results, Mike, but I would say that it's really up to the committee, and it's also up to the technological capabilities of however the meeting is being hosted. I'd also remind the committees and the committee members that it will also depend on what the public health orders are at that time and on the campus of the host institution. There may be restrictions at an institution on, say, the number of people that can occupy a room at any given time. And that might be a problem for larger committees. It also might depend on what facilities the institution has or the host has for accommodating hybrid meetings, with whether there's a capability for people to phone in or to teleport in with Zoom. So it really depends on where the meeting is being hosted and what the capabilities are and what the committee feels is the appropriate format for that suits the needs of its members.
You and I have both had the opportunity to attend quite a few articulation committees over the last couple of years. I think in this last recent round of articulation season, we BCCAT staff attended over about 40 of the 65 articulation committees. So, I mean, one of the advantages to the online format has been the ability for us to be in more places at once. But I guess I might want to get your opinion about, have you heard any discussions yet about whether committees are going to be sticking with the online format, or is there an urge to go back to the face-to-face format from before?
I think from the results of the survey, there's a recognition that there are some features of the meetings that can't really be replicated as well online, primarily the informal discussions when people chat to each other during coffee breaks or over meals or after the formal meeting time is over. And this was particularly raised in relation to new representatives attending the committee for the first time. The difficulty of socializing them into how the committee functions is very different when the meeting is entirely online, as opposed to having at least part of it or all of it in person. So I think there's a real desire to bring back that community building and network building that's part of the face-to-face experience, and which can be done to some extent online when the representatives already know each other, but building new relationships is difficult to do in an online Zoom type meeting. That being said, though, I think that most committees are very cognizant of the health issues that might be faced due to the pandemic, not just what is happening on campuses, but also the individual situations of the representatives who are attending the meeting, and trying to figure out a meeting format that accommodates that and doesn't make anyone feel excluded because, say, they are immune compromised themselves or they have an immune compromised family member. So it's a lot of different interests to balance. But to get back to your original question, I think that there are aspects of the face-to-face meetings that are missed and that the majority of respondents to the survey didn't feel could really be replicated fully in the online environment.
Yeah, I would certainly share that perspective. You know, one of the things that I enjoy about attending articulation committee meetings is meeting with people and having those conversations and building those relationships. And while Zoom is certainly easy from a logistical standpoint, I do miss those days where we can just have a conversation and talk about something that is not necessarily related to articulation, but helps build camaraderie. Looking through the chat, there's a few people that have been commenting. Jennifer Kirky has said that the Physics and Astronomy Committee have not yet decided, but they are going to be polling their members, and it's also going to depend on what their host institution, which is College of the Rockies, has to say. Hospitality and tourism have been waiting for the results of your survey, so I guess we'll see where Willie and the committee end up going. And Maggie has offered from the EAL committee that they're looking at having a hybrid meeting within an in-person format to allow for both those informal connections to be nurtured as part of the discussion. I'm looking back at the questions. Okay, so you've attended now quite a few meetings. Do you have any tips for how to effectively run an online meeting? You know, we've attended quite a few now. What are some of the things that have worked in your opinion, and what are the things that you feel might be best to avoid?
I think a lot of the tips that I would come up with would be for an online meeting would be somewhat similar to a face-to-face meeting. Not to start out with a negative point, but one format that seemed to make delegates or representatives drop out quite quickly was long institutional reports. And that's true in face-to-face meetings, although in face-to-face meetings, people don't actually walk out of the room if an institutional report goes on for too long. But I think having a clear agenda and having someone designated as a chair, and ideally also having someone to work with the chair to do what you're doing right now, Mike, is to watch for questions and Zoom hands being raised and those sort of tips or cues that someone who's busy hosting might not notice. Minute taking in online environments. In some ways, it's easier in Zoom if you have everyone's consent to record the meeting, and then the minute taker can go back and reconstruct the minutes from the transcript that Zoom produces. The difficulty there is it doesn't. I would not recommend taking the transcript straight off Zoom and plopping it into the committee's records as the minutes. It does require some editing, and not everything that's said in the meeting needs to be included. So I think that kind of distribution of work, and not just relying on the chair to run everything with the meeting, and the chair having some backup, and keeping the meeting moving while giving everyone a chance to introduce themselves and to say, to bring some information from their institution. I think those are the sorts of things that can help to build community, even within the restrictions of the online format.
Yeah, thanks for those tips. I think that's really helpful. In the question and answer, there's a question from Olivia Urbano from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Are minutes taken during the articulation committees, and if so, are they accessible? I can answer that question.
Go ahead.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are, and yes, they are accessible. So whenever a committee meets, they provide us with their meeting minutes, and then those minutes are posted to the BCCAT website. So if you go to the articulation section, you can look up each individual committee, and we usually post minutes for the past 3 years, but we do have minutes going back further than that. And so if you don't see the year that you're looking for, certainly just drop us a line, and we'll try to help you out. More comments in the chat about Human Services indicating that they're going to be meeting online this year. Maggie offers that the EAL, the English as Additional Language group, did their institutional reports in breakout rooms, and that helped in terms of summarizing and minimizing some of the time that the institutional reports take. So I think that that's a really good thing. I'm seeing a fair bit of comments about people basically saying that they're hoping to get back to face-to-face, and you know, even here at BCCAT, we are dealing with the same issue. So we have only started our return to work, or to the office space, and we are also looking to start having face-to-face meetings, as well as looking at the hybrid format. And I can just tell you, just from our very initial experience, the logistics of managing a hybrid meeting is a challenge, because it's not as easy as just going in front of a computer camera and sending out a Zoom invite. You know, you have to have a room that has been properly set up with cameras, as well as the sound acoustics that are necessary. And what is interesting is that for the people that are on the Zoom call, they're actually going to see you in a very small format in one square, rather than each person having their own square in Zoom. So I'm certain there are ways around this, but that's been my initial experience so far with dealing with the hybrid format.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's not as simple as just having a laptop set up on the table and all the remote attendees zooming in through that. It's more complicated to do it well.
All right. Well, thanks for putting the link in the chat there, Annabella. Annabella just put a link to where you can find the articulation committees, as well as the minutes that belong to those committees. Thank you for doing that, Annabella. Well, I think we have answered the questions in the Q&A as well as the chat. Fiona's this session, as well as the work that Fiona has done in terms of the presentation, we will make that available to delegates after the fact. It'll be posted later this evening. So with that, I'm going to draw us into the break for one last time. We will be coming back at 2:30 with Joanne Heslop, who is the STP manager, who is going to provide us with an overview of what's going on with the Student Mobility and Student Transitions Project research. So please come back at 2:30 to join us then. Thank you.